What's going on, guys? So today we are outside because last time I was inside, I felt like I was yelling. I have a tendency to do that. So I figured if I came outside where I have neighbors, I'll probably yell a little bit less. So we'll see how that goes. Anyways, I wrote an essay recently, and I thought I'd not share the essay with you guys. I'll post that somewhere if you guys are interested. But just kind of tell you a little bit about it because I realized it kind of turned into a little bit of a thesis on why I'm interested in the things that I'm interested in, and maybe what you can expect to see in later videos. So to begin, why do people have varying interests? What is it about all these various topics that just like tugs on the hearts of one, but not on another, right? I take my brother, for example. My brother and I both went to UCLA. He is 2 years younger than me. He studied biology, chemistry, natural sciences, and I got a degree in philosophy with a minor in history, and I studied classics, humanities, that sort of thing. What is it about history, mythology, philosophy, theology that I find so interesting? Why? And I came to the conclusion that the short answer is stories, but I'll expand on that in a little bit. I wanted to kind of dive deeper into history because I realized history is kind of at the root of it all. I like studying the history of philosophy, the history of mythology, history in general. And the reason for that is because beyond the fact that history tells a story, I think that there's also something more meaningful and deeper in history that we don't find today. And I realized this particularly when I noticed that I enjoy studying ancient history and prehistory. Anything after the Industrial Revolution, I almost kind of don't care for. I never really enjoyed studying US history. There's some things that are fascinating, and I'm proud of the history of America, but nothing's very interesting about it to me. And I think that the reason for that is because something about it just feels familiar, but not real. I'll expand on that in a second as well. Let me collect my thoughts here. So, there is something about ancient history and prehistory that seems otherworldly. And this is why anytime that you are creating a story that has fantasy or fairy tales or legend, it always takes place in the past. It's never in the future or the present day. If it were, you would have to make lots of adaptations. And then I started realizing that, to a lot of us living in the modern world, the future feels almost more familiar than the past. Like whenever you're watching a futuristic movie, it's always something that we're moving towards because we kind of have an inkling of the technology that we have now and the technology we will have in the future. But we don't really relate in that same way to the past. It's really only since the end of the Industrial Revolution that the world feels kind of familiar to us because of all the industry and technology that we're surrounded by. And I would argue that there was another shift at the end of World War II that now feels even more familiar to us. That's when the real world that we live in began. And I would say that there was a tertiary shift during COVID where things changed again, and now it just feels even more fake, but more familiar. And that's when I realized that's what it is. History feels more real than the world today. History feels more relatable, even though I've been saying that it's more familiar just because I'm surrounded by it all the time. But something about history feels relatable. Something about it calls to my soul, whereas the world today really doesn't. And it could be one of these grand conspiracy theories you hear all the time, like the old world theory or Tartaria theory, the millennial reign of Christ theory, the new world order, something like that. But it could also just be that we have reached a critical mass of secularism and advancements in industry and technology to the point where we now have artificial intelligence that is literally just creating artificiality constantly. This isn't going to be as much about artificial intelligence as you think. We have finally reached this grand futuristic vision of the comfortable utopia that we have always dreamed of, and we're dissatisfied. Depression rates are the highest they've ever been. Suicide rates are the highest they've ever been. People feel lonelier than they ever have. People are lost more than ever. Maybe it's just because we started keeping track, but I think that there is really something to it. And I think that that's because nothing feels real. And maybe that's why we don't experience miracles anymore. Maybe there is too much artificiality. There is too much of a veil over our eyes constantly. We're bombarding ourselves with TikTok and Instagram Reels and AI, and we always just have a phone shoved in front of our face. We don't actually stop and look around and experience miracles. We don't experience anything divine or supernatural anymore because we are so distracted. I think that that could truly be possible. And I started wondering if people throughout history have always felt this way. And that's where philosophy comes in. Because like I said, I like studying the history of philosophy. And that's because when you study history of philosophy, you can see how people thought throughout history. What was a radical idea at the time? What was a revolutionary idea? What was a new idea? What was a commonplace idea? How did the majority of people think? That sort of thing. Based on world events and what was going on at the time. So the first place I looked was Descartes. Descartes is a 17th century philosopher. You probably know him from his famous saying, "I think, therefore I am." And that was written in his Meditations. Also in his Meditations, he talks about this sort of thought experiment, you could call it, the malicious demon hypothesis, where he says that it is possible that at all turns during his waking life, he is being deceived by a malicious demon that is creating illusions all around him. So the coffee that he smells is not real. The paper in his hand is not real. The wax that he sees melting on the candle is not real. It's all an illusion. Everything is fake. And I started wondering, is this like just a thought experiment that he was having just for the sake of imagination? Or did people really feel this way at the time? Then I started thinking about Plato and his allegory of the cave. It's kind of similar. The idea is that they're these prisoners and they're seeing shadows on a cave wall, and the fires lit behind them are producing these shadows of things that are occurring from the outside, or there's puppeteers puppeting the images that they're seeing. One prisoner finally breaks out of the cave and he sees the light and he sees the real world, and he realizes everything else was fake. It was an illusion. They were just shadows of what reality truly was. But in the case of Plato, the entire point of this is to show that there is an immaterial world beyond the material. It's not that the material world is necessarily fake, it's just that there's something greater beyond that some people are not capable of seeing. And similarly, in Descartes' idea, I think that he was just trying to understand human consciousness. I think that he was just, obviously he was a what's the word for it? He was a skeptic. He was a radical skeptic. And so he was just being skeptical of absolutely everything. But I think today is different. I don't think that they had to suffer through the amount of blatant artificiality that we have to today. Everything in our world is fake to a degree. The food that we eat is fake. Our currency is fake. Our bodies and faces are becoming fake with all of the surgical and medical interventions. Our jobs are fake. If you have a job that has more than 3 words in the title, that's a fake job. That job does not exist. All of our politicians and world leaders and the people who are supposed to be in charge of things, they're all liars and deceivers, and they're trying to convince us that ugly art and architecture is beautiful. They're trying to convince us that pharmaceuticals are healthy for you and you should take them. They're trying to convince us that, comfort is a virtuous thing, and that everything is perfectly fine. You should just live that way. We have the ability today to live like the most luxurious kings throughout history have ever lived, ever. You have access to, like I said, unlimited artificial food that is the most highly palatable and delicious food you've ever had, more than any king has ever tasted in the past. You have access to an unlimited virtual harem of women watching pornography online. You have access to unlimited media and entertainment at your beck and call, on your phone, on your TV, on your laptop. You never have to leave the comfort of your own house. You have the luxuries of the greatest king who ever lived. And it's literally killing your soul. I truly believe, and like I said, I don't think that it has to be one of these radical conspiracies where it's like, everything is out to get us. It's possible. It is possible that it's one of those conspiracy theories and there was a cabal that is this one world government that is trying to destroy us all. Or maybe we've just strayed too far from God. Maybe we've strayed too far from the nature that God has created for us, and we can see how things were in history, and there is something palpably real about it. We can see how people thought throughout history via philosophy. We can understand the stories that created their identities through mythology, because that's all mythology, that's all myth is. Myth is just a story that tells the, explains the identity of a culture or a people group. And I think that our potential to be able to return to this natural way of living is getting smaller and smaller every single day, to the point where like a Mad Max style apocalypse event or like Dune or something doesn't seem that far-fetched. And that's why, like I said, Dune takes place in the future. I think it's supposed to. And it doesn't seem that far-fetched. It seems familiar to us. It's like, yeah, that could happen. I'm not saying that I am like one of these people say that like, oh, you're an old soul, or I have an old soul, or, you know, stuff like that. I just think that once you look past the veil of all the artificiality around you and you look at history, you're like, something was palpably real about it. And we don't have that today. And I think that the only thing that really grounds me in this reality, keeps me from like losing my mind, is stories. Because stories are true. Let me explain that. Hegel has his famous dialectic process, which is this idea of the collective consciousness of people grows more intelligent through the Hegelian dialectic. It's this process of having a thesis, you have an idea of something, you present it to another person, they provide you with an antithesis, an antithesis. The thesis and the antithesis create the synthesis, which is like the greater, more profound idea, because you have worked out these two problems against one another. Through the Hegelian dialectic, you reach this idea of absolute idealism. And absolute idealism is this idea that the collective truths or theses of all the individuals in the world culminated together create this objective collective truth. So you, on the base with the individual level, you have individual subjective truths. All of those collective truths create an objective truth. And that objective truth, in essence, is God. Now, I don't necessarily think that that's all God is, of course, but I do think that there is a truth to that. Our stories become stories because they are true. They become mythology or history because they are true. I thank God that I have God and I have stories, because I feel like that's the only way that we can really arrive at truth. And to me, that's what keeps me grounded and from becoming one of the crazy conspiracy theorists that's just like, why does the world feel fake? Why does everything feel out to get you? Maybe it is. But that's okay. You can navigate through that like all of the heroes of the past did. You can navigate through that like all of the heroes in the fantasy books that you have ever read have. And I think that there's kind of something beautiful about that, you know? But in essence, that's why I love history. That's why I love philosophy. That's why I love mythology and theology. I love learning all of these stories and the stories that people have been telling for millennia, because collectively, at the end of the day, they're the closest thing that we have to arriving at absolute truth. So if you guys like this video and you want to read the more like concise essay that's only 2 pages long, you can do that. I'll probably post it on Substack, or I'll maybe post it on Instagram or something. But if you guys like this video, please give it a like, share it with somebody who you think would enjoy it, and subscribe if you want to see more philosophy, history, mythology videos. And yeah, let me know in the comments what you guys want to see next time.